and it'll be available on our website shortly after our session tonight. Also, I wanted to start with just some etiquette for tonight. Because we're in this Zoom format, sometimes it creates some different challenges than we would have in a face-to-face. So unless you're a speaker, I'm going to ask that you leave your microphones muted, and also to leave your video off. It just makes it easier because we'll have a person showing the timing notices tonight so that we can see them. And there is an option for you to focus or to just have the speaker view, which would be helpful for you if you want. But if you could keep your video and mics muted, I would appreciate it. Okay, so tonight's event is sponsored by the Land Park Community Association, and most of you are from our community. We'd like to I posted am showing our mission and our goals, but really it's advocating and protecting our community. So the park itself, but also the greater Land Park community. And tonight we're hosting an event that brings our community together to focus on issues that will affect our neighborhood. So thank you for joining us, and I'd like you, if you have a chance to visit our website at landpark.org. We have launched a new website just this past weekend. And so it's updated and has a lot of great information about our community and about those who volunteer and serve on our association. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our co-host, Paula Lee, who's a member of the Land Park Community Association, but also with the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County. So Paula, thanks for helping us organize this event.
And thanks for hosting, Marty. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County, and I'll be the moderator for the forum tonight. Little commercial about the League. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, which means we do not support or oppose candidates or political parties. But we're a political organization of women and men, and we work at all levels of government, national, state, and local, to encourage the informed and active participation of people in government. Although we don't endorse or oppose candidates, we are a political organization, and we do, after careful study, take positions on ballot measures and legislation with our advocacy arm. You can find our positions on our website. If you're interested in public policy or want to support our volunteer work, we heartily invite you to join us. The format for the forum tonight will be as follows. Each side will make a 4-minute or less opening statement to make their case. Next, each speaker will address a question to the other side. 15 minutes of questions that have been solicited in advance from attendees in the last few days, with a 1-minute response from each side. Finally, speakers will have 1 minute for a closing statement. The timer tonight is League volunteer Patricia Pavoni. Her screen there, you see, I hope all the speakers are watching, because she will let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when to stop speaking. And I'll be rotating who answers first. So let's begin with Prop 15.
Should I start? I thought you were going to read an intro, Paula.
Waiting for
me.
Marty.
Speakers, if you could unmute yourselves, that would be helpful. So, sorry, Paula. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Prop 15. Should the California Constitution be amended so that most commercial and industrial property is reassessed on a regular basis? People who support Prop 15 say that commercial property owners should pay property taxes based on what their holdings are really worth, and that taxes from Prop 15 will help pay for important public services such as schools and fire departments. The folks against Prop 15 say that raising taxes will increase the cost of everything that people buy, including food, gas, and healthcare, and that Prop 15 will hurt small businesses that are struggling during the current pandemic. So let's begin with opening statements from, and we'll begin with the pro side, Lenny Goldberg.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the Land Park Community Association. The current system is thoroughly broken. There are companies that have not been reassessed that are paying taxes based on 1975 values or 85 values or 95 values. Think of this, no one can defend or ever has been able to defend the current system, which is full of loopholes, of tax avoidance. And what it does is it shifts the burden significantly to residents and homeowners. It also leads to fees, exactions, mitigations falling on both business and ordinary people. So we do what virtually every other state does. We split the role and require the assessment of commercial and industrial property only, not residential, not agricultural. Commercial and industrial property would be assessed at market value. Now, this has many, many benefits for California. The most direct one is that it generates about $11 billion for cities, counties, special districts, including fire districts, and schools. We've been nickel and diming and cutting back in services for many, many years. This will help revitalize our local governments. It's all property tax, so it all goes to local governments as they currently are apportioned, with the exception of schools, because schools have to be distributed on an equitable basis statewide. So it does that, about $4.5 to $5 billion for schools, about $6 to $7 billion for cities, counties, and school districts for their general funds, that they have discretion over funding or over spending, although we have very strong accountability measures put in. Small business has many exemptions, and let me point you to this very singular true fact. 10% of the properties will generate 92% of the revenue. Of that $11 billion, we're talking about properties over $5 million each, and most of them, these are $100 and $200 million properties. And guess what? A huge amount of this money, this savings, the windfall to landowners, flows out of state to shareholders, to foreign investors, to real estate investment trusts that are only held by wealthy investors. That's where the vast majority of money is coming from. It's from the 1% of commercial property owners. For small business, we build in, I'm looking for Pat, where is she? Okay. For 1 minute, for small business, we exempt properties under $3 million that are independently owned, not chains like McDonald's, but the small owners and the small businesses that are in those. We give a $500,000 exemption for business personal property, which takes 90% of small businesses off the rolls. And you will see a study next week which shows that rents for small businesses and prices have absolutely nothing to do with underlying property taxes. Any economist will tell you that the market determines prices and that the market is also determines rents, and there's empirical study to show that. But what people don't see exactly is that this is a win-win-win for everybody. It greatly improves land use. It takes the burden that is heavily pressured on new developers to pay for everything, and make sure that the windfall beneficiaries who are landowners, like the Irvine Company, like, they will not benefit, the people will benefit.
You are allowed to finish your sentences.
Okay.
Susan Shelley, opposing Prop 15.
Well, thank you for inviting me. My name is Susan Shelley. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. California has always had a unified property tax roll. In 1978, when Prop 13 was on the ballot, the legislature put an alternative measure on the ballot that would have allowed a split roll with commercial property tax differently. It was rejected by the voters 53 to 47, and Prop 13 passed with about 64 or 65% of the vote. So this is not a new idea. It's just been a persistent idea. And the problem is very simple. This is an enormous tax increase on California businesses. They're already hurting. they're already at a disadvantage against businesses operating in other states, against online businesses. Take a small retailer in a shopping mall who rents space and has a triple net lease. The property tax increase on Westfield or whoever the big company is that owns the strip mall is passed through directly to the small business. How many small businesses can accept and absorb giant tax increases, giant costs in their overhead, particularly now, particularly after 6 months of COVID shutdowns? And who really knows what commercial property is worth? You know, the California Assessors Association has taken an opposed position because they said this is, their word, impossible to implement. Impossible to implement because of staffing concerns, because of complexities in who's excluded and who's not excluded. It's not $5 million, it's $3 million. Properties that are worth $3 million or less and are occupied by the business that owns them, by the individual that owns them and also runs the business, and are not in any partnerships where someone else owns another property. That's what it takes to get the exclusion. So the assessors would have to determine who owns what, who owns how many of what, and what the inflation factor is in each county in order to determine whether these 3 million and less businesses are excluded or not. Impossible to implement is what they said. 60% of the money goes to local governments, only 40% of the money goes to schools. The California Teachers Association president, Toby Boyd, said on a podcast for Capital Weekly that this would raise approximately $4.5 billion for school districts. But how much did they need to put California in the top tier of per pupil funding, according to the California Teachers Association? $50 billion. So this, I submit to you, is a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Raising taxes on businesses will raise the prices that those businesses charge. It will cost jobs. There's nothing to stop companies from leaving California, turning out the lights, if the lights don't go off by themselves, and leaving for states that are friendlier with lower taxes. We are burdening businesses tremendously in this state, and particularly now. And this is a devastating economic blow. We have seen with COVID what happens when you shut businesses down and how government revenue declines. What happens when these businesses leave and they take their high salaried workers with them and they go to places like New York, as Google could, as Facebook could, where they already have campuses. This could be devastating for the California budget, not helpful to the California budget, not helpful to the school districts, devastating to the school districts as the Prop 98 guarantee drops with budget revenues. I urge you to oppose this measure. It's really bad timing for it. It wasn't a good idea to start with, and now it's a catastrophe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. And now your question for the supporters of Prop 15.
My question is, what protections does a business have if it leases its space and has a triple net lease? What protection does it have for small businesses? Something like 70% of small businesses rent their space. What protections does this measure have for those small businesses?
First of all, there's a huge number of home-based businesses which are not affected at all. Secondly, if you're in a building that's under $3 million, there would be no reassessment whatsoever. Third, if you're in a building with small businesses, there's no reassessment till the year 25, 26, at which point those leases, small business leases, are 3 to 5 years. They all will have expired. In fact, what was ignored here is that there's a substantial phase-in that occurs starting in 2022 with the biggest and oldest properties, but can go on for many years. And also every business gets a $500,000 personal property tax exemption, which means that that 90% of businesses, those mostly small ones, are completely off the personal property tax rolls and can save up to $5,000 or $6,000 a year. So we believe that there will be very little impact on small business.
Thank you. Lenny, your question for the opponents.
Yeah, you have companies like Chevron and Disney and Intel and IBM that have not been reassessed for 30, 40, 50, well, 40 years at this point, 42 years. Do you think it should go on for 50, 60? When do you think that property that is getting huge windfalls and paying nothing close to what their competitors are paying, the new businesses that are paying full market value, how many more years do you think they should be able to not be reassessed?
Well, their property tax bills go up when they remodel, when they add on. It goes up 2% a year with inflation. Property tax revenue is one of the most stable rising revenues in all of California. Where income tax is volatile and sales tax is volatile, counties and cities can depend on the local revenue from property taxes because it is stable. And reassessing to market value would make it just as volatile. And if the spending goes up to accommodate that new, what's believed to be the new revenue, and it doesn't come in, then you're looking at cuts, you're looking at an extremely unstable situation. So raising taxes on businesses is a bad idea in California. It will cost jobs, it will raise prices, it will be damaging to the state budget.
Thank you. Now some questions from our audience, which may provide an opportunity for you both to repeat some of your main points. The question first, we will begin with Susan. Why are people talking about Proposition 13 that passed in 1978? And what is the comparison to this Proposition 15?
Well, Proposition 13 passed in 1978 because property tax assessments were going up with market value, and property tax rates in California averaged 2.67%. We've seen property rise in our own time. Imagine having to pay 2.67% of the market value of your home every year as a condition of keeping it. Well, people couldn't do it. Whether they were businesses or they were individuals in homes, they couldn't do it. And as a result, the legislature let it slide and didn't take action, and Prop 13 got over 1 million signatures, and the voters passed it by nearly 2/3. And that's what happened then. And we're in a similar situation now, where if we were to lose Prop 13 and people were taxed on their market value, it would be devastating.
Lenny?
Respond on that same one, yes. Business even opposed Prop 13 in 1978 because they thought that they would be the ones who would receive being asked to make up the huge losses that were brought. The speaker just spoke as if residential and people were going to be affected. That is nothing furthest thing from the truth. The fact is that people have been paying new taxes, fees, and all kinds of ways that they've been nickel-dimed in this period because big corporations and huge property owners are paying 1978 or 1985 values. It makes no sense. It's actually bad for business. It's anti-competitive. It's very bad for land use in a state that needs more housing. This is not, this is correcting, I could say, improving Prop 13 by correcting the huge flaw that went 2/3 of it to business, commercial, industrial property.
Okay, Lenny, we begin this one with you. What groups and organizations support Proposition 15? And I'll be asking Susan the other side.
Okay, the League of Women Voters, the California PTA, a number of labor unions, the Board of Mayor Darrell Steinberg, presidential candidate Joe Biden, Attorney General and Vice President candidate Kamala Harris, the mayors of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland, the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors, many local governments, about 1,000 local officials, and numerous community organizations. I will cede my 30 seconds. We have massive, broad community support from all kinds of elected officials, from all kinds of community organizations.
And Susan, what organizations or groups oppose Prop 15?
Well, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association opposes it. The California Assessors Association opposes it. The California Business Roundtable opposes it. There is a long list of business organizations. Essentially, everyone who is going to have to pay higher taxes or pay higher prices opposes it. And people who will spend the tax money are in support of it. It's pretty simple.
This one for you, Susan. How would Proposition 15 affect local small businesses?
Well, local small businesses that are in a space where they own the space and they run the business and they're worth less than $3 million, they will not be reassessed. But if they rent their space, they will be paying the higher property taxes that are put on the owners. And it's easy to say that the leases will be renegotiated and it won't be an issue. It's difficult to do that. Commercial property is in a world of hurt right now, as businesses have been shut down for months and have not been able to pay rent to the landlords, and the landlords are in trouble, and the real estate investment trusts are going to be in trouble, and we could have a financial rolling disaster as each of these groups can't pay its bills because of COVID closing the business at the front door. And raising property taxes in this environment is extraordinarily reckless for the state budget, for the taxpayers, for the businesses, for the people looking for work.
Lenny?
So she misstated the exemption under $3 million is not necessarily, it's for property owners, not necessarily those who have to work in their own business and own their own business. And those businesses are where a very large number of small businesses are. We've looked at a number of local businesses that people have cared about, including in Sacramento, where they said we're concerned. Fact is, many properties are assessed close to market value. With regard to, I'm blanking on that second point, but all the business organization, when they talk about prices, that's definitely not happening. The prices, if you go to a store, one place or another, those prices are online. The property tax has nothing to do with prices. This is not going to be passed on. It goes on to wealthy investors and large landowners.
Lenny, this might be another chance for you to make those points, but one of the questions we have here is, if Proposition 15 passes, what buckets would the tax money go into? Would it go exactly where the proposition promises it to go? Classrooms, fire, libraries, counties, and cities?
Absolutely. It's a property tax. One of the issues people have complained ever since Prop 13 about property tax allocation, and the legislature comes in and tries to do something about it. But the fact is that we're not changing the property tax allocation. Proposition 1A, put together by the cities and counties, guarantees the money cannot be shifted away. It cannot be taken by Sacramento. It goes to cities, counties, and special districts, very important for fire districts and water districts. And the school money is shared because poor rural counties get their fair share of school money. With regard to one other point that was made earlier, this is phased in. The legislature, the assessors, the Board of Equalization, who will do enforcement of the things the assessors can't do, will have a task force, the time to phase this in over time. If the economy is not doing well, the legislature will say, no, we're not going to phase this in. But you can be pretty sure they're going to look at these very big properties and say, Disney can pay, Apple can pay, Intel can pay. We're phasing it in for them, and we can wait for others.
Susan?
Well, that's just a confession that the thing doesn't work. It already needs the legislature to get in there and do fixes. It already needs a phase in and an exit door. It doesn't work. It is a huge tax on California businesses. People work for businesses. They shop at businesses. Of course the prices will go up. Of course Disney will be hurt by it. Of course Chevron will charge more for gasoline. Of course they will.
Susan.
Also, I should say that the money goes 60% to local governments, 40% to school districts. It really is needed for pensions, for the overpromised pensions that our local governments have signed contracts that are binding on them. And they are getting bills from CalPERS and CalSTRS, and they are having to pay enormous pension bills. And that is what is driving this endless need for tax increases.
Okay, well, I think we've exhausted our questions and we can now move to some closing statements. It's only 1 minute, but 1 minute can be a long time for you to address any of the things you felt were left out so far and make your case.
Well,
So,
there's a ridiculous statement made that the legislature gets to implement.
wait, Lenny, you'll have a chance. We're going to start with Susan.
We're
and
starting with Susan.
yeah,
Okay.
for closing, sorry. Go ahead, Susan.
This is my 1 minute closing statement.
Yes, thank you.
I would just like to say that California has always had a unified property tax role. It has never taxed property differently based on how it was used. Businesses that are rental homes can be paying income tax on the rent. Businesses pay lots of different taxes in their businesses and generate different kinds of revenue, hotel taxes, sales taxes, other types of taxes for commercial property. To raise property taxes sharply from what they currently are is a tremendous burden on California businesses. This is a catastrophic time to do something like that. We do not know what these businesses are valued at. What's the value of a restaurant? What's the value of a hotel? What's the value of an office building? There will be endless appeals. There will be endless litigation. This will be very expensive for counties that will not be receiving any revenue, as the Legislative Analyst's Office has shown that not all of them will receive revenue. Some will lose revenue, and this will be very expensive for them. So I urge your no vote, although I understand you've already endorsed it.
You're talking to the audience of the Land Park Community Association. Lenny, your closing statement.
Yeah, every place in the country does this virtually. It's not a difficult task, but the measure is very sensible because it was ridiculous to say the legislature should have no role. After Prop 13, the legislature had to do contortions to make it work. We wrote in very carefully, it's good government, and they can say, oh, the legislature should have no role. We wrote in very carefully a phase-in, a timing, a group of people getting together and making the system work. This is a win-win-win for California. It's good for local government. It's good for every resident who's put upon by local taxes and fees. It's good for businesses who will be operating on a level playing field. It's good for land use and the environment because they hold vacant land off. I know that's a difficult concept, but it has many, many beneficial effects far beyond the fact of making the system equitable and curing the hugest hole in the state's tax system.
I want to thank both of you for being here, for your passion about your positions. Now we're going to move on to Prop 20.
Okay, bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Marty, you have a slide for Prop 20. You're on mute, Marty.
Sorry, Paula. Here we go. You see it?
Yeah. Okay, Prop 20. Should California law be amended to make changes to the process by which people are charged with certain crimes and the process for granting them parole? The people who support Prop 20 say that Prop 20 prevents violent criminals from getting out of prison early, and that collecting DNA from people convicted of drug possession or shoplifting will help solve more serious crimes such as rape. People opposed to Prop 20 say that California already has some of the toughest laws against serious and violent crime, and that Prop 20 wastes millions of dollars on prisons that could be spent on education, healthcare, or affordable housing. We will begin with opening statements from the proponents of Prop 20, and representing them is Rob Lawrence.
Ron Lawrence, representing the California Police Chiefs Association. 332 municipal police chiefs in California support Proposition 20. Does four things. Most importantly, it expands the list of which violent crimes are not considered violent in California. You might be appalled to hear this, as all our police chiefs are. Certain crimes such as human trafficking of a child, abduction of a minor for prostitution, these are not violent crimes in California and therefore eligible for early release. Rape by intoxication, rape of an unconscious person. A drive-by shooting is not a violent crime in California. Felony domestic violence is not a violent crime in California. Solicitation to commit murder, and the list goes on and on. There's 22 of them. Proposition 20 puts these violent crimes, these heinous crimes, right back into the right category and categorizes them as violent crimes, and therefore makes them ineligible for early release, therefore giving the victims in California a voice. The second thing that Proposition 20 will do is addresses the serial theft rings in California. It's no secret that since Prop 47 was passed, we've had our local businesses in our communities just ravaged by these organized retail theft rings. They go up and down our state, they'll drop off into one city and go to the next, and they can steal up to $950 because anything less than $950 is a misdemeanor. They don't go to jail even if they get caught. They get a citation with a court date because the jail's full and it's only a misdemeanor. Proposition 20 will help address this because on the third conviction, not arrest, by the way, conviction, and not the first one, not the second one, but the third conviction. If somebody got arrested and convicted 3 times for theft, for shoplifting, then they can be charged as a wobbler, which means the district attorney has the option, case by case, to file that as a wobbler, either as a felony or a misdemeanor. And to make sure that we have the ability to address these organized retail theft rings. It also, on that third conviction, lowers the threshold from $950 down to $250. This is critically important for California because our local businesses, your businesses in your town, have lost billions of dollars since Prop 47 has passed. It's so bad that we have retail stores that have stopped calling the police because they know that there's no accountability for theft. You can go to any city, any town in California and talk to your local businesses and they'll tell you a thief can come into their store, they can shoplift up to $950, and even if they're caught, they get a ticket. They can walk right across the street to another store, steal another items up to $950, and keep doing that all day long because these crimes are not aggregated. So Prop 20 fixes this and it helps us address this, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with the District Attorneys Association who prosecute these crimes to make sure that we can hold those retail theft crimes accountable. Fourth thing it does, Proposition 20 empowers the Parole Board of Hearings to consider an inmate's entire criminal history, not just their most recent charge. Since prison realignment was enacted, the Parole Board can only consider an inmate's most recent charge. Well, why is this important? Because there's some very bad actors in prison. There's some people that have been convicted of homicide, rape, child molest. And these individuals, you have to look at the totality of their criminal history. They might be out on parole, and they get rearrested on some low-level crime, maybe a property crime, maybe a vandalism, maybe a burglary, maybe they violated their parole terms and they're back in prison. The parole board can only consider that most recent charge. They cannot consider those previous heinous crimes. That individual may need a lot more rehabilitation, whether it's mental health help, whether it's addiction help, anger management, whatever, they still need that help. The last thing that Proposition 20 does is it allows us to collect DNA samples on those that we arrest that were removed from felonies to misdemeanors as a result of Prop 47. DNA sample collection is critically important for policing, not only to identify and apprehend the appropriate suspects of a crime, but more importantly, to exonerate those people who are innocent from committing crimes. So DNA samples have become the crime-fighting tool of the 21st century, just like fingerprints were back in the day. So we urge you a Prop 20 yes vote.
Dan Seaman, opposing Prop 20.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Seaman speaking for the No on 20 campaign. I served as a criminal justice advisor to the last 2 governors overseeing corrections and public safety policy. I've worked with Chief Lawrence in the past, and I have a lot of respect for him. And we've worked well together in the past on a number of issues. Unfortunately, we just have a fundamental disagreement on this proposition. What you just heard was an amalgamation of 4 different policies jammed into one ill-conceived ballot initiative. And honestly, we're kind of lucky with this, with Prop 20. We have the benefit of hindsight here. This is the rare opportunity where you actually know through 30 years of lived experience what these policies will give us in terms of public safety and safety in our communities. And the answer is you won't get more safety. We've spent the last 30 years on a mass incarceration binge. California has been one of the highest incarceration rates in the entire world. And what have we got? For that money and for that time and for that human suffering, we haven't gotten more safety in our communities. The truth of the matter is crime has actually dropped over the last 10 years since realignment, since 2010. We now, a report out this week has shown that we have the lowest crime rate now in California since we started collecting stats at the Department of Justice. Those are crimes that are tracked, specifically including many of the crimes that the chief referenced. So what really we have here is a emotional appeal to scare tactics that we've seen before. We've seen this movie before, and we know what we get for this effort, and it's not much. What we need is proven investments and crime-fighting strategies like community investment, diversion, restorative justice, rehabilitation and reentry in prison. Those are the things that make us safe. Those are the things that have allowed us to save money on our prison budget. Those are the things that have allowed us to have a crime rate go down. So going quickly through those points, the chief mentioned victims groups. The largest victims group in the state, the Californians for Safety and Justice, opposes this measure. Several elected DAs of the largest counties in California oppose this measure. The Partnership to End Domestic Violence opposes this measure because this does nothing to actually serve victims of crime. In fact, the changes to property theft, making one of the lowest felony thresholds in the country, would actually result in a budget cut to trauma recovery centers and programs that serve victims in the state. So when we talk about victims, we should actually ask victims what they want. And resoundingly, the largest groups of crime victims in the state roundly reject this measure. With regard to shoplifting and organized retail theft, this does not solve any problem. Prop 20 does not solve the problem of theft. We had shoplifting prior to Prop 47. We have it now at a lower rate, in fact. And under California law, those organized retail theft rings that were referenced can be charged as felonies. There's an organized retail theft felony in California that can be charged. Those charges can actually be aggregated under People v. Bailey, which is case law in California and hasn't been abrogated by any act of the legislature, any initiative. So those multiple small level thefts can actually already be brought into one larger grand theft charge. So at the end of the day, the solutions, quote unquote, that are being put forward don't actually solve the purported problem. And we know that from lived experience. So I would urge us not to spend tens of millions of dollars more on state prison and incarcerating people when we actually have proven strategies that we're embarking on now in California.
Thank you. Now, Dan, your question for the supporters of Prop 20.
Yeah, I would like to hear, Chief, sort of your explanation for how incarceration and more incarceration in California is going to solve the problems of mental health treatment, homelessness, economic inequality that we all know are the root drivers of crime. I'd also want to ask sort of why would we want $250 a stolen bike to be a felony when today we have all of the tools at our disposal to arrest, prosecute, and convict people for theft?
Well, in all fairness, that was 2 questions, but I'll do my best. With regards to, and I'll keep it specific to Prop 20, because your first question was really not really only about Prop 20. But Proposition 20 doesn't put one more person in prison. It only keeps those in prison who committed these heinous crimes. There's 22 of those nonviolent crimes, and it would make them ineligible for early release. It doesn't put them back in prison. These are people that already committed those crimes. And as far as the shoplifting goes, Proposition 20 is very explicit that those folks cannot go to prison. If they're convicted a 3rd time, 3 convictions, then they can either get put into drug rehabilitation or rehabilitative programs or county jail, but not prison. In regard to the shoplifting, I think it's critically important to understand that that's also dealing with those who are suffering from drug addiction, those who are continually stealing and convicted of 3 crimes over and over and over. These are people that need help, and we want them to get the help, and the criminal justice system can do that by mandatory drug rehabilitation programs.
And Ron, your question for the opponents.
Well, my question's simple. As a lawman that served this state for over 30 years and as a police chief now for almost a decade, I've got to ask the opposition, how can you consciously look a victim in the eye and tell them that certain crimes like rape of an unconscious person, pimping a child for prostitution, rape by intoxication, and the other 19 crimes that are not considered violent shouldn't be considered violent crimes, and those victims, perpetrators, should be eligible for early release? How do you do that?
Well, as I said, the largest crime victims groups in the state oppose the measure, and that's because they believe that rehabilitation and accountability is what is needed when it comes to violent crime. That's what they seek. And with regard to the label, whether we call it violent or not, these are horrific acts that demand accountability. And California punishes every crime you just mentioned harshly, extremely harshly in many cases, and up to and including a life sentence. And this proposition does nothing to change that. It doesn't increase punishment. It doesn't ensure convictions. It simply removes the incentive to rehabilitate once you're convicted of these crimes. 95% of people leave prison. They will get out. They will move into your neighborhood. They will participate in our society. And you have to ask yourself, would I rather have somebody who has participated in programming, learned a skill, made amends and sought accountability with their victims and come out a stable individual who's going to contribute to society? Or do I want somebody who's participated in gangs with no opportunity and no hope coming back out worse than they were when they went in? Sorry, I went over a little bit.
Okay, Dan, questions now. We'll spend about 15 minutes on questions from the audience or questions that have been solicited in the last few days from the group, the Community Association. Could you explain, and you'll have 1 minute to answer these, both of you will answer them, explain the collection of DNA noted in Prop 20 and its role in public safety and victims' rights?
Sure, I can start. As I mentioned, DNA collection really helps us to not only apprehend the appropriate suspect, but it also helps us exonerate innocent people. It's a critically important tool. DNA collection, I only need to say the Golden State Killer to express to you how important DNA collection is. And cold case cold case investigations resulting from the removal of DNA collection since Prop 47 have been down exponentially. Some of them some very serious and violent crimes. So we need this ability to help us apprehend the appropriate suspect and exonerate innocent people. I mean, DNA collection is the police technology of the 21st century. It's as, if not more important than fingerprint technology was back in the 30s. So for us, this is important moving into the future. California Police Chiefs Association and policing in general have always been very progressive in trying to find the most appropriate tools for us to be the best versions of ourselves, and DNA collection helps us do that. So these are only those crimes, by the way, that were reduced to misdemeanors as a result of Prop 47.
Dan?
This is a specific issue with regard to DNA that really doesn't belong in this initiative. This initiative, again, removes rehabilitation from prisons, increases incarceration for low-level crime, creates a 3 strikes and you're out policy for low-level probation violations, and then adds this piece on DNA. California has one of the largest DNA databases in the country, and this could easily have been solved through this discrete legislation, through the legislature. It's unnecessary to spend tens of millions of dollars on prisons and on incarceration in order to solve the issue that the chief raised. I'll leave it there.
Starting with you, Dan, what are the intended outcomes if the proposition passes or doesn't?
Well, so if the proposition passes, the intent is quite clearly to incarcerate more Californians at great taxpayer costs, which is a policy that we've tested over and over in this state and has not worked. If this does not pass, California has continued on the path of reform, smart, targeted reform to the criminal justice system. That is working. We are saving money. We have less reoffense, And, you know, we need to continue down that path.
Ron?
Well, you only have to ask yourself if you feel safe and secure in California right now. And I would tell you that most of the victims I've talked to do not. I think that the best thing that this proposition will do is fix some of the unintended consequences of Prop 47, Prop 57, and prison realignment. There's some good things in there, and they were very some well intended, but there was a lot of unintended consequences. Proposition 20 doesn't put more people in prison. It will prevent people from being released early if they've committed some of those heinous crimes. And it's hard to argue that those are not heinous crimes. And we're talking early, we're talking about people that are given sentences and they only do like a third of their sentence. And so Proposition 20 will help keep California safe. It will also help our retailers and our grocers associations by giving us the ability to hold people accountable for serial thieves. 3 convictions for theft. I mean, come on. We need to be able to hold those folks accountable and in the right way. If they have a drug addiction, we need to be able to give them help. If they're the retail theft rings, we need to be able to hold them accountable.
And Ron, how would Proposition 20 impact the state budget?
I don't think it's going to impact the state budget much. I mean, it's going to hold prisoners in prison longer if they are convicted of one of those 22 violent crimes that he reclassified as violent. But these are folks that are being released early and at the behest of the victims in California. As far as the theft piece, well, that's going to save California billions of dollars because we're bleeding money out of California because of theft. And it's not just our businesses, it's passed on to you, the consumer. You can go talk to these businesses and you want to know why California is so expensive? That's one reason right there. We're getting ripped off. Our businesses are losing money and they have to increase their cost. And you, the consumer, are paying more monies at the cash register. So that's going to save California billions of dollars.
Dan?
Well, so the Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a nonpartisan entity, has estimated tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer costs to this proposition. And up to potentially 10,000 more state prisoners because of it, which is more spending on prisons, less spending on other priorities that will actually prevent crime. I also want to address a couple things in terms of being given the ability to hold people accountable for theft. We have that ability today. Current law covers these scenarios that you're describing. And when we talk about early release, I want to be very clear. The issue at hand that we're talking about is people getting an opportunity through rehabilitative programming to make their case to a parole board, which is made up of conservative law enforcement officials and former officials who have a less than 30% grant rate, meaning very rarely do people actually successfully earn parole. This isn't early release. This isn't fixing a problem whereby people are automatically being released because of the nature of their crime. That's not the case.
And Dan, is there any language in this proposition that may confuse voters?
I find it personally very confusing. The proposition addresses 4 or 5 different distinct issues with the criminal justice system, some of which are completely unrelated. This really is a mishmash of policies, most of which have either been tried or failed to pass through the legislature because they weren't fully baked. And they've been sort of mishmashed into this one proposition with proponents telling us we need to pass it because of scare tactics, essentially.
Ron?
I think proposition is very clear, especially for those Californians that have been victims of crimes. In fact, our coalition sued the opposition. The opposition's language in the ballot that they had said was wholly incorrect and a lie. And we sued and we won. And so they were forced to change the language in their ballot initiative. So Proposition 20 has been very transparent. It's very clear. I think the 4 issues I've laid out to you are pretty straightforward, common sense. And it's one of those propositions that is at a time and place needed in California because we're at a point where people no longer feel safe. Proposition 20 is going to help us do that.
And Ron, regarding the money saved due to the early release of prisoners, where was it intended to go? And has that been the outcome? Why or why not?
Well, I don't know that I said that. The money saved would be the billions of dollars with regards to the serial theft. And that's in our retailers, our grocers, your Home Depot, your Walmarts, your Lowe's, any mom and pop shop that's been victimized by theft. They're going to save millions of dollars, billions of dollars in California. As far as the violent crime categories, well, you can ask any victim. Ask any victim that's been victimized by a rape or a child that's been pimped for prostitution. Ask them how much that it's going to cost them for the rest of their lives to deal with those crimes, and knowing that their perpetrator is being released early or eligible for early release. You heard Dan say that very few people get eligible release from prison. That's not true. People get released from prison early all the time. I get a list every week from CDCR telling me how many people are getting released early from prison. So it happens routinely. And as far as the parole board of hearings being law enforcement, that's not true either. I mean, there are some law enforcement on there, but they're governor appointees.
Dan?
So addressing the money issue again, the impartial analyst has said this will cost us tens of millions of dollars to the state budget. With regard to retail theft, claims that businesses will save money and that will trickle down to consumers are sort of a reach at best in my personal opinion. And it's quite clear that the state and local budgets for incarceration will increase. So I think your original question was about the funding. You know, with regard to, I can go back over the same points about the parole board. You know, this is a very conservative parole board in California. That's an objective fact. Just because the governor's you know, appoints these folks doesn't mean much. These are full analyses. They do go through everyone's full history and full life and dig deep into the reasons behind the crime that they committed and whether they've been rehabilitated. These are thorough hearings. I've sat in on many of these hearings, and they're exhaustive and thorough, and very few people pass that test.
Thank you. Okay, we have exhausted the questions, and so we will now go to closing statements. Your opportunity to, in 1 minute, cover anything you felt has been missed so far in your presentation. And we are going to begin with Ron. I'm sorry, Ron.
No problem. Proposition 20 is a common sense proposition. It's supported by the California Police Chiefs Association, the California District Attorneys Association, the California League of Cities, and hundreds of cities within the state. Crime Victims United and multiple crime victim advocacy groups, the California Grocers Association, the California Retailers Association, and over 1,800 endorsees. So it's important to understand who's supporting this proposition. And by the way, when Dan mentions crime victims groups, the Californians for Safety and Justice is not a crime victims group. They're an advocacy group. They are ones who helped push for Prop 47 in the first place in 2014. And this is a part of what's gotten us into this mess in the first place. So I think that Proposition 20 doesn't repeal Prop 47, Prop 57. It only goes in and narrowly focuses on those unintended consequences and fixes those things that need to be fixed. I'm a over 30-year police officer and almost 10 years as a chief, 2 different cities. I can tell you crime has come down because of a lot of good hard work by the men and women in law enforcement and our justice system.
Thank you, Ron. Dan?
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ron and Paula and everyone for your time this evening. Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice absolutely is a crime survivors support network. It's the largest in the state. And the Partnership to End Domestic Violence is also a victims group. And I think they'd be concerned to hear otherwise, but they do not support this, nor do the biggest newspapers in the state, including such liberal rags as the Bakersfield Californian and the Orange County Register. Both oppose this measure. This is really an ill thought out, wildly expensive proposition that does nothing to keep us safer. That's the bottom line. So I urge you all to vote no on this proposition.
On behalf of the Community Association and the League, thank you both so much for taking the time tonight to be here and make the case on both sides. Now we'll be moving to Proposition 22. And the question is, Should app-based rideshare and delivery drivers be classified as independent contractors, not employees? And should rideshare and delivery companies be required to adopt labor and wage policies unique to these drivers? The people who support Prop 22 say that rideshare and delivery drivers want to work as independent contractors, not employees, and that forcing companies to hire drivers as employees would get rid of hundreds of thousands of jobs. People opposed to Prop 22 say that rideshare and delivery companies don't want to pay drivers basic benefits, and that treating drivers as employees will make sure they get paid sick leave and unemployment benefits. So we will begin with an opening statement from Kyle Griffith supporting Prop 20. Welcome.
Hi there, and thank you for the opportunity to present. Greetings from beautiful Midtown. My name is Kyle Griffith. I'm the Senior Coalitions Coordinator for the Yes on Proposition 22 campaign. Proposition 22 is going to save app-based jobs and services. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are at risk because last year, drastic new legislation passed by the Sacramento legislature threatens to make it illegal for more than 1 million Californians to continue working as independent contractors with app-based rideshare, grocery, and food delivery network companies. 80% of these drivers work part-time, fewer than 20 hours per week. They rely on this flexible work to help supplement their incomes to make ends meet at the end of each month. We're talking about parents who drive when their kids are at school, caretakers who have family members that are homesick, artists who are trying to support their passions, students to work around their class schedules. And the reason why they're able to do that is because the independent contractor classification gives them the flexibility and independence to pick when, where, and how long they want. But access to these flexible earning opportunities is at risk. I mean, we're only a couple weeks removed from Uber and Lyft announcing that they were potentially going to have to end services in California due to lawsuits traced back to this law. And what was lost in that initial conversation is that drivers want to remain independent contractors. By a 4-to-1 margin in independent survey after independent survey, drivers have expressed that they prefer being independent contractors. The employment models just simply doesn't work for many of them. We have independent research from Berkeley Research Group that shows that forcing these drivers to be treated as employees could eliminate 80 to 90% of app-based jobs. At a time when California is experiencing record high unemployment, that is simply ludicrous. And so what the solution is Proposition 22. It was put on the ballot in October of last year, and it seeks to improve the quality of app-based work for these hundreds of thousands of Californians. It requires drivers or the platforms to provide drivers with a guaranteed minimum earnings of at least 120% of the minimum wage in whichever market they're driving. It adds 30 cents a mile compensation towards expenses. And there's no cap on how much drivers can earn. A recent study by UC Riverside found that under Proposition 22, many drivers working on average 30 hours a week would earn upwards of $25 an hour for engaged time. Proposition 22 also adds access to healthcare. Drivers that work 15 hours a week start earning a contribution, which becomes a full contribution under Covered California at 25 hours per week. And drivers can earn multiple healthcare contributions if they're working for multiple companies. It also adds occupational accident insurance to cover on-the-job injuries and illnesses, and strengthens and improves existing protections against discrimination and harassment. For consumers, it ensures that these services remain available and affordable. These companies are going to want, if they're forced to treat their drivers as employees, are going to want to make sure that there is sufficient demand to justify the operating in most areas of the state. What that means is that with fewer drivers available, we're going to see longer wait times, higher prices, and potentially the elimination of services in many parts of California. Proposition 22 is supported by more than 100,000 app-based drivers, nearly 100 organizations, including the California Chamber of Commerce, California State Conference of the NAACP, the National Action Network of California, and dozens of other business, senior, disability, and other groups in support of this measure. And we hope that voters support us here in November.
Thank you. Claire Lau, opposing Prop 22.
Oh, I don't see Claire in our room. Oh, here she comes right now. You're going to have to give her a chance to warm up a bit or to ease in. I just admitted her.
Oh, she'd been sitting out there?
No, she wasn't.
Oh, okay.
I
Were
think
you able to hear, Claire, the opening statement of?
We're ahead of schedule. Do you want me to do it again?
Claire.
I just joined though. I didn't hear anything. I thought we were at 8:03.
Yeah, we're a little bit early.
Okay, I was on in another meeting, so I just hopped on as soon as I could.
We can relate, but unfortunately, he just finished his opening statement, and so you are up for your opening statement opposing Prop 22.
Great. First of all, what is Prop 22? What are the intended and unintended outcomes of the proposition? Prop 22 is a special exemption that Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, Instacart wrote and paid to get on the ballot. It is a special exemption that only applies to these app companies and would exempt them from the very basic responsibilities that all other employers in California must pay. It would mean that they won't have to pay sick leave, no minimum wage, no unemployment insurance, no breaks for meals and rest periods, no health care, no workers' compensation when drivers are hurt on the job. All of this during a pandemic. According to a 2020 study conducted by the University of California, if Uber and Lyft had rightfully treated their drivers as employees, these two companies would have paid $413 million into the state's unemployment insurance in the past 5 years. Instead, right now, during the pandemic, California taxpayers have to pay for the emergency aid to these drivers. One of your questions is any language in the proposition that may confuse voters. There are a lot. Some of them are the minimum earnings. Prop 22 states that drivers would earn $16.80 an hour. However, research at UC Berkeley found that Prop 22 would only pay drivers $5.69 an hour when you account for out-of-pocket costs, the lack of basic benefits, and the time they're spent reporting into work, but not counted as actively serving customers. Also, there's a lot of language around safety and sexual harassment, but Uber and Lyft already are required by law to conduct criminal background checks. Prop 22 eliminates required sexual harassment trainings and to investigate customers' sexual harassment claims. They don't need to use a ballot measure to buy these special exemptions. They only need to follow the law that is already on the books and that all other businesses comply with already. There's a lot of language around flexibility going around, especially in ads right now. There are some myths about most drivers only work a few hours, but UC Santa Cruz research showed that over 50% of the workers actually work at least 40 hours a week. There's some misconception about following the state labor law makes it impossible to allow workers flexibility. That's absolutely not true. There's nothing in current California state law that prevents a company from allowing part-time employees from setting their own shift schedules. I used to be a substitute teacher, and I was able to have my own schedule, and I was paid as an employee with, benefits like sick leave. These corporations, as of yesterday, have put in $181 million into Prop 22, the most of any ballot measure in California's history. Groups that do not support Prop 22 are labor organizations like the California Labor Federation, the AFL-CIO, Transit Workers Union, SEIU, the California Federation of Teachers. The California Democratic Party has said no on Prop 22, and well over 100 elected officials have said no, including Vice President Joe Biden, Senators Kamala Harris, and Senator Elizabeth Warren. Some of the direct impacts to the land park community, future retirees would be impacted with their Social Security and Medicare for retirement because Uber and Lyft refuse to pay into those. Businesses will see their unemployment insurance rates go up because they are not able to because companies like Uber and Lyft are not, actually paying into their fair share. And also working people obviously are impacted by this.
Thank you, Claire. Do you see the timer? Since you came in late, I want to make sure that you see her there with the blue.
Now I see her. It was a little difficult at first.
Yeah, but there she is. So she'll be letting you know when you have 30 seconds left and when to stop. So Claire, now your question for the supporters of Prop 22.
Okay, my question is that the companies sponsoring Prop 22 have acknowledged that the pandemic has cut their rideshare business by 75%, which means that there are many out-of-work drivers. Many of these have filed for unemployment benefits, yet Uber and Lyft have not contributed a dime to the of payroll taxes into the unemployment insurance in California. Why do you think it is fair for every other employer in California to pay for the unemployment benefits of out-of-work rideshare drivers?
Sure. App-based rideshare, app-based work is truly unique kind of work. I mean, there's no other, employer where you can work for multiple companies at the same time concurrently. For example, like if you're working at McDonald's and you look across the street and you see that the Starbucks has a line out the door, you can't tell your boss like, hey, I'm gonna go work at Starbucks for an hour to kill that line and then I'll come back. But with app-based work, you can. These drivers have access to work. They're able to start and stop whenever they want, taking breaks for months at a time, setting their own hours. They don't have to ask for vacation time or sick days. The unemployment insurance is, it applies to more traditional forms of employment. Folks aren't getting fired by their employer on app-based companies except for serious violations of the terms and service. So it seems inappropriate to do so. And the unemployment is being paid for by the federal PUA, not California state directly. So it's a unique kind of work, and we feel that the independent classification is the proper form.
And Kyle, your question for the opponents of 22.
Absolutely. Earlier, you mentioned a study by the University of California, Santa Cruz. One of the authors of that study very recently on Twitter said that it was okay if the majority of drivers who work part-time lose access to this income if it means that the full-time drivers get benefits. At a time with record unemployment, do you think that it's appropriate to eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs that are helping people make ends meet at the end of each month?
So several things. First of all, our campaign does not speak for that person at UC Santa Cruz. Obviously, I don't think it is okay for anyone to lose their jobs. However, I think some of it is this person may be referring to the threats by Uber and Lyft saying that they're going to pull out of California. And these are threats that Uber and Lyft have made elsewhere before. They've made this time and again. And we don't think that these threats actually showed that Uber and Lyft have their drivers, workers' rights and drivers' benefits in mind. They are actually just showing that they have their profits in mind and want to bully basically the California voters and the legislature and everyone else in fear to let them get away with whatever they want. And therefore, Uber and Lyft don't have to pull out. They can be offering employee benefits and still operate in California and treat their workers properly.
Thank you. Okay, now we have some questions that have been solicited in advance in the last few days from members of the community. And I think they'll give you a chance to restate some of the important points that you've made. So we're going to begin now with Claire with the first one. And the first question is, could you address the recent legislation that passed that excludes certain industries or contractors now from Prop 22?
I will say that, so
She means AB5, right?
AB5 is, I would assume that this is a reference
No,
to AB5?
I think it's referring to the recent legislation that allows for exemptions.
Let me just kind of go back to clarify what AB5 is. AB5 is a clarification of existing law about workers' rights and what is classified as an employee, what is being classified as a contractor, and basically saying that what the California Supreme Court has decided 2 years ago, saying that if somebody is part of the major function of a company, they should be classified as an employee, if that is the core function of the company. Regarding the recent exemptions, I think that those are industries with a really long history of workers being able to have their own, basically running their own business, which is very different from what you see here in the rideshare apps, because actually their salaries, how much they're earning, is being controlled by Lyft and Uber.
Okay, Kyle?
So I think that, with that recently passed legislation, the exemptions to AB5 now exceed 110. 110 professions had to get official exemptions from this law. And we're having to put a ballot measure before California voters. I mean, I think it just proves how flawed AB5 is and how desperately it needs to be reworked. Proposition 22 seeks to strike a balance, though, between what the goals of AB5 were with the desires of what drivers want. 70% of drivers say that they want to remain independent contractors, but they also want to get paid more. Proposition 22 provides additional earnings for drivers. It adds additional benefits in healthcare and occupational accident insurance to cover on-the-job injuries and illnesses. And it ensures that they maintain the flexibility and independence that drivers so desperately want and desire.
And Kyle, are other gig jobs, excuse me, in California impacted by this proposition, passing or not passing?
Earlier today, there was a story by CBS Los Angeles talking about a app-based company called Hop, Skip, Ride. They provide transportation services for children to school. And they endorsed Proposition 22 today because their drivers are simply unable, or they're not able to continue with their business model if Proposition 22 doesn't pass. While the big guys, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Postmates, and Instacart are the sponsors of this initiative, there are other companies that are supportive of our measure and believe that without a fix, they're going to have to cease operations in California, leaving thousands of people without access to earning opportunities, as well as customers who lose access to these services.
Claire?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
The question was, about other gig jobs in California. Will they be impacted by this proposition passing or not passing?
So, and actually that is one of the reasons why there is so much labor movement behind the no on Prop 22, is because this proposition will have an impact on other gig work and work in California and potentially work all over the country. Basically, Prop 22 would set a precedent of companies or companies in general being able to exempt workers that are a core, basically their core revenue source comes from these workers, and they're going to be exempt from actually classifying them as employees. And this will definitely affect other gig work in California, other work in general in California. And this could also have a ripple effect into other states. We've seen in New York, they've passed legislation protecting workers. They have a better minimum wage there for app drivers. And if California passes Prop 22, that could have a ripple effect into these app companies being able to undo workers' rights all over the country.
Kyle?
Oh, I went first. I get to respond again.
He gets a new question.
Oh, a new question, sorry. The new question for you is, Claire covered it a little bit, but is there any language in the proposition that may confuse voters?
You know, not necessarily in the proposition itself, but in the title and summary that was prepared by the Attorney General. You know, when we filed this initiative, the Attorney General gave us a pretty straightforward explanation of what it does. But in the official voter guide, the description was a little bit different. I don't have it up in front of me, but you know, Prop 22 was one of 7, I believe, campaigns that sued the Attorney General over you know, the ballot title and summary being slanted against them. And so, you know, we think that that is regrettable on the part of the Attorney General. But no, I think that voters understand that Proposition 22 is going to provide additional benefits for drivers. It's going to keep these services available and affordable. And, you know, we're confident that they're going to support us in November.
Claire?
I had already kind of discussed some of this in my presentation earlier, but there's a lot of language that sounds nice. You know, they'll have more earnings, more safety and protection from sexual harassment, flexibility, etc. But the fact of the matter is there's nothing preventing Lyft and Uber from enacting these things right now. What they're trying to do is write themselves a special exemptions from current existing law. And those under Prop 22, the protections given to workers are actually less than if they would just follow the law and actually treat their workers as employees instead of contractors. Those protections given to workers in California are much better than the protections that are given under Prop 22.
And Claire, can you address any impacts on the state budget that Proposition 22 may have?
Absolutely. As I've mentioned before, Prop 22, because would exempt these app companies from paying into funds like unemployment, Medicare, Medi-Cal, all of these things, they are actually right now not paying their fair share of taxes into the state budget. And as we're seeing now with vast numbers of people applying for unemployment insurance, and actually California does have some emergency unemployment insurance funds, the federal government is providing some as well. Basically, everybody else is picking up the slack from the lack of funds provided by Lyft and Uber and these gig companies, because they are refusing to pay their fair share of taxes to the state of California by exempting themselves from being an employer to these workers.
Kyle, impact on the state budget?
The Legislative Analyst's Office, in their initial write-up of Proposition 22, said that the impact on the budget would be that higher income taxes received by the state, because more people are going to be working. These services are providing flexible work opportunities that are helping people make ends meet at the end of each month. I mean, we've already discussed at length the number of people who are, you know, suffering from unemployment, but you know, for so many other people that are underemployed too, these services are helping make ends meet. I mean, I'm sure that if you guys ask any of your rideshare or food delivery folks, like, hey, how is this like helping you make ends meet. They'll tell you personal stories about why they need flexibility and independence. And you know, more than 100,000 drivers support Proposition 22 for all those reasons.
And Kyle, are there any, or could there be any unintended consequences from Prop 22?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, with all legislation, there could be unintended consequences. The measure was written, you know, by 5 of the biggest app-based companies, and you know, I'm not sure, but I think that there could be other, you know, app-based companies that would be subject to the terms of Proposition 22 that could be impacted. But I think that, you know, the overwhelming majority of the impacts are going to be better. It would improve the quality of app-based work for the drivers and ensure that for consumers that it's or that these services remain available and affordable.
Claire?
As I've already kind of mentioned, by undoing labor protection laws, you know, by saying that we don't have to pay the majority of our workers, you know, paid sick leave, minimum wage, unemployment insurance, healthcare, workers' comp, all of this, I think, will have a ripple effect into not just the workers, drivers at Uber and Lyft themselves, but also workers in other industries in other states. And Kyle keeps saying that drivers want flexibility, and I've already mentioned before that there's nothing in current law that actually prevents drivers from having their own flexible schedule. I myself experienced that as a substitute teacher, and so I think that the real impact of unintended consequences is going to be undoing, you know, decades of workers' rights protections, and, you know, of course, also just not paying into the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into the state funds.
Claire, how will any increased costs for medical benefits filter down to drivers or to the public?
You're saying increased costs for medical benefits if they were, sorry, where does a medical benefit come from?
Well, I'm just reading the question from the audience member. How will these costs of, if the benefits that are paid to app drivers, will that filter down to drivers or the public?
I mean, as with all industries, it is up to the companies whether they want to actually be providing the benefits like health insurance to their workers, and it is also up to the industry and the companies whether they're going to pass down any of these costs. I think that it is a moral responsibility for employers to be actually offering health insurance to their workers, and I think in general that is going to be, well, it is extremely important, especially in the time during this pandemic. And I think the cost of not providing paid sick leave and health insurance to workers is so much greater and so much more immediate when you have people getting sick because of coronavirus, not being able to stop working even when they're sick because they can't pay their bills, they can't support their children. And I think that above all, it needs to be the responsibility of all employers.
Kyle?
Sure. I mean, with Proposition 22 and, you know, including access to healthcare for drivers that work at least 15 hours per week, which becomes the full contribution at 25 hours a week, averaging about $367 per month. There are going to be costs that are going to be passed on to consumers. Prices are probably going to go up for these services. But the alternative under an employment model means that with the smaller driver pool and hundreds of thousands of people losing access to earnings, I think we will see impacts. The cost for these services with drivers as employees will skyrocket. And I mean, I think that, you know, consumers are going to see a huge amount of negative impacts from the higher costs of the transportation and delivery services.
Okay, now it's time for closing statements, and we will begin with Kyle.
Proposition 22 is going to save app-based jobs and services. I think that, more than anything else, what we should, pay attention to is what drivers say they want. With 70% of drivers expressing a continued desire to be independent contractors, and Proposition 22 providing, the stronger earnings. It's not a floor, or it's not a ceiling, it's a floor that ensures that drivers are earning more than minimum wage wherever they're driving. It adds healthcare insurance. It adds coverage to cover on-the-job injuries and illnesses, and has broad support from nearly 100 organizations, from the business, public safety, seniors, social justice, community, religious, agriculture. The list goes on and on. Proposition 22 is a good deal for drivers. It saves hundreds of thousands of jobs and ensures that services that millions of Californians and businesses are relying on continue to be available and affordable. And we urge everyone that's on this call to vote yes on 22 this November. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Claire.
So Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart's Postmates have put $181 million into Prop 22 because they do not want to pay their employee benefits and protections and protect their drivers. They wrote this initiative to circumvent the law that requires them to treat their workers as employees rather than contractors. If app companies truly wanted to help the drivers, they would be making sure that their workers have gloves and masks and the equipment, personal protective equipment that they need, and the way for them to help and protect their families and the public right now, and they wouldn't be spending all of that money to write themselves a new law. All of these drivers, 78% of whom are people of color, are essential workers. They are helping California through the pandemic, and they deserve better. We believe that the drivers, many who are Latino, Black, or from other communities of color, should have sick leave, healthcare, unemployment benefits, and the flexibility that they need for scheduling. That's why I urge everyone to vote no on Prop 22.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here tonight, and we will now move on to our closing remarks.
So I just would like to thank everybody on behalf of the Land Park Community Association for joining us tonight. I'd like to give a special thanks to Chris Rogers, another Land Park Community Association, or I should say LPCA, it's easier to say, a member who helped organize our event. I'd like to give a big shout out to all of our speakers. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us and help us understand each of the three propositions better. Thanks to Patricia Pavoni, who was our timer and did an excellent job. Thank you, Patricia. And finally, a big thanks to Paula Lee, our moderator. You did a great job. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Paula, to talk a little bit about other resources that will be posted on the LPCA website that you can see right here at the top of your screen. Thanks, Paula.
Okay, just some resources for all voters. There's new opportunities for voting in Sacramento County. Ballots will be mailed out on October 5th to every registered voter. And if you are not registered to vote, you can register or re-register if you're unsure about your signature or if you've moved. You can do this online easily at registertovote.ca.gov. And you can check your registration status at voter status at that link. There's 3 ways to vote in this election. You can put it in the mail. I advise voting early if you put it in the mail. There's no postage required. Another way of casting your ballot is to, be sure and sign the outside envelope. That's one of the things the registrar says. A lot of them come in not signed, and they make the effort to call every voter and have them come in and sign. It's really a great service. But be sure and sign it, drop it in a secure drop box if you haven't mailed it. And I put on here most Rayleighs. I've since found out that all Rayleighs and all Bel Airs and basically every county library will be drop boxes between October 5th and November 3rd, including Bell Coolidge right here in our community. The Vote Center is another way that you can vote in person. And at a vote center, it's really full service. You can replace your ballot if you've lost it or spilled coffee on it. You can register to vote at a vote center. You can get information in various languages. You can find accessible voting equipment there. And you can also track your ballot. I gave you the link there, so you can, after you do vote, if you want to find out where your ballot is in the process, make sure that it was received by the county registrar's office. You can do that on Where's My Ballot. And the resources from the League of Women Voters are very helpful. You can find that at our California website there, lwvc.org, where we have the pros and cons of all ballot measures and an easy voter guide. One of the most helpful things for voters and candidates has been our Voters Edge website, where you can do research on ballot measures and candidates, get lots of information that the candidates provide. We do this as a public service for candidates so that they don't have to spend as much money getting their message out. They can do this for free. And so we encourage voters to go there and learn about these candidates and learn about the ballot measures. And included in the Voters Edge website is a lot of great information on campaign finance. Who are the people that donate to candidates and ballot measures? Sometimes that helps you make a decision. So thank you all very much for attending this forum tonight, and thanks to the Land Park Association for hosting it.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you, Paula.
Bye-bye.